Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Henry Schein Dental Academy webinar series. My name is Adam, marketing specialist, and I'll be your moderator. Today, we're welcoming Eric Pook and Bernie Marcotte, who represent Cirrus Consulting Group. Eric and Bernie will provide insights as to whether relocating your practice or renegotiating your lease is right for you. Before we get started, we've got a few reminders. At any point during the webinar, we do encourage your participation. Please type any questions you might have into the Q&A section of your control panel, and we'll answer them live at the end of the presentation. Henry Schein is not offering CE credit for viewing or attending this presentation live or on demand. And this webinar is sponsored by Henry Schein's Dental Business Institute, as well as Cirrus Consulting. Eric and Bernie, thanks for being with us. Take it away.
Adam, thanks for your time. Thanks for having us again. Bernie, welcome. This is, we were just reminiscing with Adam. This was almost a year ago to the day. We had a few thousand doctors register as COVID was ramping up and everyone was sheltered in place, and pretty remarkable how far we've come. So we back then was talking about how to go from surviving to thriving, and really looking forward to sharing all new content and really reflecting from the hundreds and hundreds of active negotiations we have from coast to coast to share some of the best practices, to talk about really this afternoon is all about the ultimate question, which is, is now the right time to contemplate making that move to a relocation? Or do I just want to hunker down and focus on making some key or dramatic improvements by renegotiating the lease? And I think you'll be pleased to see in some cases we can have our cake and eat it too. So really looking forward to some great new content and some key discussions. We're going to do a poll in just one moment. And this, we want to customize our content. I know everyone's had no shortage of great courses and information. We certainly appreciate everyone's time. We really want to go into some great tangible tips and tricks, talking about how to focus on driving profitability, focusing on renegotiating arguably one of the most expensive hits to overhead. So you'll see an audio. There was someone with some audio issues. I trust you can hear us okay, Adam?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. So it might be on your speakers, Doctor, but perfect point. For those of you that are connected, we encourage you to have some great interaction tonight. We've got two of us on here. So any specific questions you may have, we encourage you to use the Q&A sections. We'll help to answer as we go. If not, we'll have a Q&A section towards the end. And really looking forward to really having some fun this evening. So on that note, if we can pull up the poll, we'll help to customize the content for this evening to give us a little bit of a sense in terms of the room. Normally, Bernie and I are flying all over through to Honolulu. Seems like yesterday, or Greater New York, or Yankee, or otherwise, and doing this in person. So we'll try to replicate as much of that as we can to keep things interactive. So a couple of questions that you can see in front of you. Again, if you're driving, don't zoom and drive, but give us a little sense. Are you looking to potentially open, relocate, potentially to acquire, thinking of transitioning from that perspective? Is it the right time to relocate if I'm thinking of transitioning in the next 5 years, or I want to stay put? So that's question number one. Number two, purpose of today, some knowledge, some guidance, or needing some help with a specific situation. And then the expiry, that's a unique component, right? One of the best ways to help assess the relocation and timing is obviously what are we contractually bound to within the current lease today? And then again, for those of you that are looking at things from a glass half full, Rockefeller, invest in an uncertain market, looking to start or build. In my opinion, it's got a lot of hallmarks to what we had in 2008. And for those of you that signed, 5 or 10 year leases or opened up a new clinic back in 2008, definitely got some tremendous benefit, and most were able to lock in well below market rate or what it did over the subsequent years. So we're really in a very unique period of time. Also, we'll go through, for those of you that have a lease, there's a quick button to say for a rental rate analysis. Bernie's going to touch on a lot of that here today. So again, the real purpose of today is to not make us real estate or negotiation experts, but to help get a little bit of information about what the landlord and the tenant relationship is and how it's changed over the past 12 months with the rise of COVID. So we've got market data, we've got all sorts of key information, and very pleased to be joined by our Senior Vice President and General Manager, Bernie Marcotte. All right, let's jump in. So one of the key things I love to start some of the events with, or some of the lectures as one of the instructors at the Henry Schein Dental Business Institute back in West Allis, Wisconsin, is 85, 54, and 80. So what does that mean for us? Well, 85% of dentists have a lease that can prevent them from ever selling their practice, number one. Number two, and this, I would argue, is even higher based on the impact of COVID. 54% of dentists across North America are paying at or above market price, especially in markets that have seen an increase in vacancy or an increase of months on market, decrease in total leasing activity, where suddenly the market's changed, but your lease has not. And then, of course, in many cases, a number of you have things like a consideration language where the landlord could be entitled to a percentage of the practice sale proceeds when you choose to eventually sell. So let's jump in. So the core of this afternoon's webinar is a few things. Number one is we want to talk about the trends. What's the data showing us now? What does that mean for us? How long is it going to last? And when does the COVID amnesia kick in the eyes of the landlord, where they're going to start to get right back to asking for at or above market rates and get back onto the rolling roller coaster? In addition to that, we're having a lot of great conversations with clients. I've had the privilege of talking to hundreds of clients from coast to coast over the past few months. And a lot of it is a renegotiation conversation. Eric, my lease is coming up in the next 2 years. What do I do? And what do I do if the landlord's coming back or going to come at a much increased rental rate versus what I have today? And part of the conversation there is, first of all, what's right for you in the stage in your business? And then in addition to that is, why not think about at least, right, dipping our toe in the water and engaging the landlord down the street, maybe sending in a proposal to see that landlord that's got a beautiful new build out of a strip mall who's got 50, 60, 70% vacancy. And just imagine how anxious that landlord would be that's well behind in mortgage payments or otherwise to have a dentist, let alone an established dentist, come to their mall, bring in all this high quality foot traffic, let alone build out, right, a beautiful dental practice. So it's a really interesting time to put yourselves in the mind of the landlord and really to appreciate how much leverage you have. We'll touch on some factors to consider. We'll talk on how our negotiation strategy has changed and how we can help to assist to both have significant financial wins as well as the business wins as well. For those of you that aren't aware, Sears Consulting Group, we are the foremost experts for dental office lease negotiations in North America. We are the only healthcare specialized tenant representation firm of our kind in North America. We were selected by Schein almost 10 years ago to help their clients throughout all of North America, let it be opening their first clinic, relocating, renegotiating the lease with mid-career doctors, or helping transition doctors prepare for that transition, or also for those of you that own your own space or are thinking about relocating to a location that you might be looking to purchase. Right? We also help those doctors with a lease to separate the corporation that owns your building from the corporation that owns your practice. So we've had the privilege, again, over 12,000 successful negotiations. We deal with clients from coast to coast and also lecture at many of the premier dental conferences. So it's my privilege to introduce our key speaker to give the National Real Estate Update, Bernie Marcotte. We did an extensive search looking for a true real estate professional that had a great understanding of the full North American market. Bernie's been a great addition to our team. He's come from one of the major leadership positions throughout Cushman & Wakefield, throughout North America, and really looking forward to having him share some of the core perspectives of the market. And Bernie, over to you.
Thank you, Eric. Privilege to be in your living room, in your office, maybe in your car. Certainly different times. I look back on that picture and I'm wearing the same jacket today. Mind you, it's a little bit tighter, but fun to be back, fun to be in front of you and talking about how this change and everything that's been happening, what it means to you, and how it can affect the business of your practice. I've been through in my career, I've been through a couple of economic cycles, through some recessions, certainly through the crash in '08, and picked up some lessons learned. And one of the things that I learned is that those with the deepest pockets end up being the winners in the long run. And some of the stats that we're going to show you later on in the presentation will show you how large institutional landlords, even medium-sized landlords, pension funds, private equity investors in commercial real estate, how they're positioning themselves for the rebound. And although I'm not an economics major, certainly follow a lot of the bigger heads and what they're talking about. And for sure, things are going to bounce back. So there's never been a better time, and you'll hear this throughout the presentation, there's never been a better time to renegotiate your lease, be it staying where you are today, be it a relocation, be it creating a competitive environment from where you are. And the stats will show it. Where do we get our information from? And the slide that we have here is not necessarily to impress you, it's more to impress upon you where we get our data from. So I am on the phone on a daily basis with senior executives from developers, landlords, pension funds, institutional investors, talking about where they're going and what they're thinking. Some of them are calling us. Some of them recognize that Cirrus is a serious player in the healthcare professional lease negotiation space, and that they're looking for insight into what you want. What are you looking for? So recently, a major North American developer reached out to us and had a sit down with us, just a sort of a round table, to talk about what do healthcare practitioners, dentists specifically, what are they looking for in their space? What are some of the things that we can provide them to make them be attracted to our building? Because your tenancy means a lot to them. It means a lot to them in terms of foot traffic. It means a lot for them in terms of their financials. When it comes time for them to renegotiate their mortgages on their properties, be it a small investor or even a medium size or even the large players, having a dentist in their space is like the Rock of Gibraltar. You're not going anywhere. You are one of the most secure tenants in all of the different businesses that are out there. So we're talking to all the executives. We have a research department. We're tracking, and it's on your screen, 95 billion square feet of commercial real estate space. It's quite impressive. And so we're going to go through a couple of different markets. If by chance you don't see your particular city in our presentation, please send us an email and we will gladly sit down with you, look at your lease, and take a look at your market and show you how you compare versus the rest of the people in your area. So to no one's surprise, here's what's been happening all over North America. Availability is skyrocketing, and the trend is going to be that way until the economy rebounds and landlords start repositioning their assets. Everything is on the table for landlords right now. They're having meetings daily, talking to their people, saying, what do we do with all this vacant space that it's not even hit its peak yet. It's about to hit its peak. So what do we do? How do we reposition it? Do we go retail? Do we put a data center? Do we do mixed use? So no one's surprised, leasing activity is at an all-time low for the last 10 years. And I haven't seen these numbers since the 08-09 crash. And I think my prediction is that 2022 is going to be just as low. So taking a look at a couple of specific markets throughout North America, San Antonio gives us a typical supply and demand, where you see in 2021, I won't bore you with all the numbers, but in 2021, early 2022, they've hit their peak in vacancy, yet the rates are still climbing. This tells us that there's a lack of inventory, and the same thing replicates in Houston. Houston's got a serious lack of inventory, and although the vacancy rates are going to decline, it's still a very, very tight market. You see that delta between the orange line in Houston at the top and the blue line on the bottom, and it bottoms out in early 2022. And then it starts peaking up. And that's strictly due to inventory. They have a huge inventory problem. They have tremendous amount of growth in terms of population. And that's what's creating that effect. Dallas got hit really, really hard through COVID. Vacancies are through the roof. When you start seeing vacancies over 10%, and you're going to see it in some of the graphs, when vacancies hit over 10%, that's when landlords start panicking a little bit. And that's when there's a bit of a fire sale. And that's when they get really aggressive with the deals that they want to do. And conversely with Miami, one of the things that we've seen in Miami is that the city is throwing economic development dollars at new startups. So their recovery is going to be a lot better. It's actually a very attractive place for people to start new businesses. We're quite big on Miami. Now, Jacksonville's got a bit of an unusual dynamic happening where the vacancy rates are going to continue to climb. They've had a mass exodus of major tenancies, yet they still continue to let their rental rates are going to be climbing and climbing, but still a big gap. You see the big gap between the orange line and the market rental rates. That gap is an opportunity for you because with the vacancy rates being as high as they are, landlords are going to be motivated to do deals. Orlando, very nice market, a little expensive. And then look at the curve in Los Angeles. Whoops. Yeah. I was going to say Orlando's a really nice market. We look at Los Angeles. Now, the opportunity in California, we think are great because you can see the huge gap. There are big rental rates and big vacancy rates. So the rental rates are dipping quite a bit in 2022. And that gap between the top of the orange line and the blue line, having a bigger gap shows you that there's a fantastic opportunity. Even if you've got 2 years left in your lease and you want to open discussions, or 2.5 years left in your lease and you want to open discussions with your landlord, you may want to stay in your building, but it's a great time for you to secure your space and maybe do what they call a blend and extend. And I'm a big fan of the blend and extend. You can open up your discussions. You've got nothing to lose. You're letting your landlord know that you're open for discussions and that you have enough time, if they don't want to play ball with you, that you'd be willing to leave. You got time to leave. And with 3 years left or 2.5 years left on your term, you can extend another 10 years, depending upon the business needs. And now you've got rent certainty, and the landlord's got a tenant for an extra 7 to 10 years after term. It's a great time, and especially with that delta that they have in Los Angeles. And the same thing with San Diego. We do a lot of business on the West Coast. We love negotiating with those West Coast landlords. They know us very well. They know what we ask for in leases. They know all of the different clauses that we like to have and how we protect your best interest. Same thing applies. They have the same sort of dynamic in San Diego as they have in Los Angeles, except that the rental rates are obviously much lower. Another $6 a square foot, which is significant. But that delta between the yellow line, which is the vacancy rate, at 10%, starting to get into that double digits, that's when the landlords are getting itchy. But everyone is predicting a recovery right through end of 21 into 22 and into 23 with the recovery. Rental rates are going to go up, vacancies are going to go down. The opportunity is lost when that vacancy crosses down on an upward rental rate.
The old hometown of San Diego, I mean, it's almost a vertical curve.
Yeah.
7.5% to estimated to be over 10.5% this year.
And look at Sacramento. It's a bit of a different dynamic in that market, that sub-market, with rental rates continuing to climb and climb. They haven't seen a lot of vacancy, not a big spike. As a matter of fact, it's still hovering below 10%, which is it's a fair dynamic between the tenant and the landlord. Doesn't mean you can't open up negotiations and look at that blend and extend opportunity. Now, New York City, not for the faint of heart, but look at that curve. Look at the gap between the vacancy rate. Even though it's not high, it's still in the single digits. It's a nice number, but the rents have just dropped I mean, it's a massive drop from 2019, 2020 into all the way into, mid 2022. To me, if you're in the New York market, there's never been a better time to open up your lease. I'd be more than happy to sit down with you if you've got a year, 2 years. I'd look at 2.5 years on your lease, depending upon your landlord and their openness to renegotiate. You've got the power here. Okay, it's advantage doctor on this one for sure. This just gives you an idea of the type of depth that we have at Cirrus and the reports that we can produce. As was mentioned in my bio, I come from a big corporate America background, worked with some international firms like JLL and Cushman and Wakefield, where I was market leader, senior managing director, had access to all the best tools, all the toys, all the research. This rivals all of them. We've got them hands down. We provide data that can show you stats on buildings, subnodes. If you want to compare your building versus your competitor in the next building, or you've got your eye in a building, as all of you are driving into work, with your Starbucks coffee, you probably see a bunch of vacancy, signs everywhere. What does that mean to you? How can you take advantage of that for your business? We pull reports that can show you availability. One of the big ones that we like is time on market. How long has a property and a vacancy been on the market? Sometimes we've seen like 12 months, 15 months, 19 months on the market. That's just advantage for you. That tells you that this is the time to go to that landlord and say, I really like your building. I like where you are. I'd like to talk to you. But you know the stats, right? You know how long that property has been sitting vacant, costing him money. He still has to pay tax. He still has to pay maintenance, right? Still has to keep the upkeep. So, and we talk about asking rates, and asking rates are always a negotiable piece. So we have market reports, we have building reports all over North America. Don't be shy. If you haven't seen your city, you'll see our email is going to come up frequently throughout the presentation. Let us know, and we'd be more than happy to jump in and give you a hand. And first of all, review your lease, find the obstacles, and then provide you with a market report. And it's been a real pleasure being able to talk with you today.
Okay, I know we've got lots of questions, so keep those coming in. There is the Q&A section for those of you just joined. Feel free, we'll answer some of those as we go through Q&A or through the chat function. And therefore, lots of good questions. Question that just came in specifically about being in year 5 of a 10-year lease with options. Is it too early to negotiate? So we'll cover that a little bit in terms of the best time. In short, it depends. But a good question to ask yourself is, what's in it for the landlord for them to want to make a change? You're right. Maybe you're paying X, right? And you look next door, or you look at the vacancy sign, and they're advertising it at dramatically less than what you're paying, and you're saying, hey, that's not fair. The question is, depends on the situation. Are you doing any renovations? Are you potentially looking to expand? Are you making any significant investments into the practice that might necessitate a value for the landlord? Again, what's in it for them to potentially break the lease early? Typically, as Bernie said, about 2.5, maybe even 3 years as an opportune time to start to engage the landlord to renegotiate. It's never too late, but in some cases, some landlords are going to say, hey, we're just digging in. We're trying to figure out where things are going to land and holding on with both hands. So I wanted to summarize a couple of key points from questions from previous courses. Number one is looking back and through the craziness of last year, ask yourself, did you make any changes or alterations to the space? Did you bring in any contractors? Did you cordon off any specific operatories? Did you change the airflow? The next question is did you get the landlord's prior written approval? So one of the mistakes that many doctors have made through COVID was they made some changes to their space without the proper authorization. Now, of course, the world was changing, shelter in place, we were trying to reopen, everyone was trying to figure it out. But Be cautious. For those of you that are following along in your lease agreements today, look in the alteration section. Are you required to give the landlord prior written approval? If you did make changes and it impacts airflow or you blocked off some operatories, that might have some unintended consequences. Maybe it's going to impact certain aspects of the fire code. Maybe that'll impact some of the airflow, for example. So there's reasons why some of the landlords put these clauses in. It's not just to be difficult. So just be cautious. If you did make unapproved alterations, that is something that could be an issue, or depending on your lease, could be a default situation or otherwise. Also, another question we get a lot of is specifically about rent deferrals and abatements. Talking to a doctor in Florida yesterday, unfortunately, she got no help whatsoever from the landlord. Another doctor in the Northeast, just for asking for a 1-month deferral of rent, they got a 7-page document that just for moving last May of rent, they got asked to give them a full personal indemnification, basically a personal guarantee, and they also snuck in a demolition right, just for asking to move 1 month's worth in rent. So there was some craziness that occurred in 2020. But if you did receive any rent deferrals or abatements, the question is, did you get it documented? Was it just a text with a property manager? Hey, Dr. Smith, pay me what you can. We'll figure this out. Right? If it wasn't properly documented, then technically the lease is the governing document. If you missed those monthly rental terms and paid it later or otherwise, that could, again, if you didn't meet your contractual obligations, that could come up as an issue down the line if the landlord has held you in default as a result. We got letters from doctors, one that was in an enclosed strip mall, nice neighborhood shopping plaza. And it was a few days into the pandemic, they got a beautiful brown envelope that said, doctor, unfortunately, per the requirements of being open, regardless of the pandemic, but you're required to being open. Therefore, we're finding you in material default of your lease purely because the doctor was closed because of, right, the statewide mandate. So again, just be cautious. It's a perfect opportunity now that we're coming out the far side, taking a deep breath and looking at things like the lease as one thing to help make sure you get aligned and structured properly moving forward. Because look, you are the best possible tenant for the landlord. Your location is your business is your location. And as you saw, when you laid off your staff, the number one hit to overhead became the lease. And collectively this time last year, everyone was digging off their lease and dusting it off to try to find out, hey, what's in my lease? Do I have any protections? Unfortunately, most found out they didn't. Obviously, it is. It's a high investment to build or relocate, which we'll spend some more time on. Right? A lot of doctors now are contemplating selling or transitioning. But ultimately, as Bernie really illustrated, it gives you leverage. It gives you great leverage in terms of how you're going to structure your business moving forward. All right. Now, let's touch on what we mean by leverage. This is one of the most sought after sections. So for those of you following along and contemplating, Eric, should I stay? Should I relocate? What's best for me? There's 7 main financial variables through the negotiation of the lease. Most doctors pick up the phone with the landlord, pick up the phone, make a quick call and say, hey, my lease is coming up for renewal. What's the new rates? However, annual increase could easily be 3, 4, 5% per month. If we're seeing some of those stats that Bernie showed that didn't show a 3% annual increase in your market, well, guess what? You're now, right, high probability are overpaying in comparison to market price. Number 3 is common area maintenance. This, especially for those of you in a newer location or a newer mall, it could easily be 1/3 of your base rent can be coming from common area maintenance. This is negotiable. Repeat, this is negotiable. Depends on how your lease is structured, but there are certain things. We did a great blog post for those of you on our website. There's a great one regarding what is reasonable and what is unreasonable in terms of what should be charged. If there's a lot of vacancies in your lease today, does the landlord have the right to pass on those brokerage fees or legal fees or otherwise that are impacting other units that have nothing to do with you? If so, is that fair? Well, unfortunately, life is not what is fair, but what we negotiate for. So that's a key element. There can also be things like a common area maintenance cap, perhaps an amortization period. There's a number of strategies of helping to ensure that it's accurate, such as a audit right or other facets that right from a letter of intent can be negotiated to help increase your financial situation. Fixturing is another component where and I'll speak up for those of you that can hear me as well, but fixturing is another main component where by being able to negotiate for a number of months from the time that you are getting the keys to the time that you are opening your practice, right? That is referred to as the fixturing period, from possession to occupancy. That ideally you should not be responsible for paying base rent for. Highly likely you're going to have to pay the common area maintenance, but try to not overlap. Try to not double pay in rent if you're relocating. So there's ways of structuring it. If your fear is to say, look, I never wanted to relocate because I'm going to have to incur all this extra expense and double pay in rent, there's ways of structuring it to avoid that. But there could be multiple months, right? Or up until the time that you're open. And also, if there's another wave of COVID and you're not able to complete, then there's other ways of having some termination rights that we've been successful in doing for those of you contemplating relocation or building out. Free rent is another one. Some landlords are open to this, and especially in exchange for a long-term lease. Don't forget, the landlord only sees you as one thing, term and rent. It's the dollar sign on your forehead is what typically they see when they look at you as the tenant. So let's use that to our advantage. If we're willing to commit to a long-term lease, right, that's as if we're handing them a check for $500,000, $1 million, $2 million. So therefore, ask yourself, if you're about to give them that check by signing that lease renewal, that simple little one-page document, but by renewing that lease, right, are we getting the benefit? There was an example the other day with a large institutional landlord. We negotiated a 10-year term and we're able to get 1 month of free rent for each and every month that we had. Of course, that doesn't happen every time, but it was a key example that almost after a year and a half of negotiations, the landlord, right, really wanted the value of the dental tenant and was able to make some specific concessions. Landlord work and tenant improvement allowance. We get a lot of questions on this. Tenant improvement allowance can be great. Great, the landlord, Bernie, they're going to give me $40 a square foot. Doesn't that sound like a great deal? Yes. However, the money is not coming out of thin air. The landlord is not in the lending business. So of course, typically they'll build that right into the base rent. The challenge with that, as you can imagine, is that every year as your lease goes up 2, 3, 4%, suddenly that little loan amount suddenly becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And what might have been $100,000 of money from the landlord, you might have paid back $250,000 over the next 10 or 15 or 20 years. So be cautious. I call tenant improvement allowance, think of it as a little bit of fool's gold. Looks great, right? But is it really going to help you save money over the long term? Bank of America, other banks are coming out with different incentives now, 18-month promos, et cetera. There's lots of ways where the feds aren't even thinking about raising rates. It could be a very opportunity to get different sources of money, right, in order to maximize your financial position. And then landlord work. We're going to see a great example from a doctor in Northern California, 73 years of age, tried to sell her practice 3 separate times. Each and every time the landlord said no. She then hired us. We relocated her practice 10 minutes north, and we got the landlord to cover the entire build-out cost. Can you imagine being at the end of your career and something as frustrating as the lease is something that would prevent you from selling and having to go through that process at that end stage of your career purely in preparation for sale? Again, for those of you that aren't sure what's in that lease, you can email us a copy of that at info@searsconsultinggroup.com. All right. So let's get into the tactical side of things. We had just a quick question here. Let's look at that for a second. So if I'm contemplating selling the practice in about 3 to 5 years and a month to month now, should I try to negotiate the lease? So there would be an existing lease for the buyer. So, doctor, first of all, thank you. This is a great question. some of which in some cases don't want to ask because of the month-to-month basis. So let's touch on that for a second. So month to month, a lot of you may think, great, I love the fact that I can continue to pay the monthly rent I'm paying today, but you know what? I'm not bound to a long-term lease, and COVID, what happens if something goes wrong? But you're looking at it with a very short-sighted approach. You're not thinking about all the value of your practice. So let's talk value for a second. If you talk to any of the Henry Schein Practice Solutions team, one of the first things they'll say is that the ultimate value of your business is the predictability and continuity of revenue. Right? Think about it. The buyer, or for those of you looking to buy, what are you really looking to buy? It's how much money am I going to be able to receive, right, to keep the lights on? What are the existing patient charts, goodwill, right? But basically, the question is once you wear the owner's hat and you start to get to work, right, are you going to be able to pay your bills? That's the value. So therefore, it's a key component to be concerned about, which is that if you are a month-to-month tenant, first of all, please, at the end, there'll be a little section to note if your situation is urgent. Please do so. That is definitely something that we want to focus on and assist with, because as the results, depending on the landlord, depending on their severity of the situation, or heaven forbid the landlord goes bankrupt, if you're in a month-to-month lease, 30 days notice, the landlord can wake up tomorrow morning, post a little brown envelope and say, you're out in 30 days. And then it's not the question of, well, hey, Eric, when's the right time? Should I renegotiate? Should I just relocate? You're now, what would you do? Who would you call? You're reaching out to the Schein team or otherwise to say, I got a big problem. I got to find a space fast. And, price at that point becomes no object, because it's not even the loss of production at that point. It's the patient attrition, which can be upwards of 8 to 9% for each and every month that your lights out. Think about it, right? You're closed. You're feverishly trying to open and build out a new location up the street, right? Now the patient, what do? They need some urgent care. They go down the street and they never come back. So if you're in a month-to-month situation, I would strongly suggest yes, right? The banks, for example, if you have a month-to-month lease or you've only got 2 or 3 years left on your lease, it makes it very difficult for the buyer to get a 5 or a 10-year amortization period to pay back that loan, because there's no assurance that that doctor is going to be able to stay in the space. And the banks, I'm sure, have been burned lots of times by giving a doctor $1 million loan. Suddenly 3 years later, they're out on the street because they didn't have the assurance or support of a lease to protect them. So if you are thinking of selling in 3 to 5 years, first of all, definitely have your lease professionally reviewed. Happy to have a conversation and look through that lease. You want to look through the assignment and subletting section to determine if and how much control the landlord has. You might not be able to sell without the landlord's prior written consent. Also, as we'll touch on shortly, if you do sell, look out for the continuing liability clause, which means that even after you sell your practice, you may remain personally or corporately continually liable for the next doctor, even after you've sold the clinic. So that is found, again, through the assignment and subletting clause for those of you following along. To summarize a few components thus far. Number one, doctors, take a deep breath. We've gotten through a terrible situation. We're not out of it by any means, but a lot of you have had some fantastic years. A lot of you were very close to previous years. Some of you had the best Q3s of your entire life in 2020. So first of all, congratulations. Number two, you're not alone. Number three is, hopefully now you realize that you are one of the greatest gifts to the landlord. In my opinion, you are the best tenant on the planet. Regardless of the fact the landlord says, you know what, I've got 12 other people that are taking your space over tomorrow, be cautious. Right? You represent an incredible value to that tenant. You pay the highest build-out costs. Right? You have the lowest default rates, in some cases less than 0.5%, in comparison to a restaurant that's almost the complete inverse, right? To be there after 10 years. Typically, the practice is in the same location for over 26 years. right? And also you sell for some of the highest value of any other commercial tenant. So therefore, right, look at yourself, look at the amount you're paying per month, multiplied by the term of the lease, multiplied by how long you may be there or how long your buyer is going to be there. And if you look at that as that $1 million check you're about to write to the landlord, what now would you do differently? So that's the do the math. So what's the solution? Plan it out, right? Help to give yourself enough time to make sure to say, you know what, shoot, you're talking to your spouse tonight, honey, I only wish, right, 3 years later, I only wish I looked to potentially relocate when those vacancies were up and COVID was going on. I only wish I looked to see what that landlord down the street would have been willing to do to potentially earn my business. Prepare for those negotiations and help to prioritize what are your must-haves in that new location or in your existing location, what are your nice-to-haves, and what are things that you're willing to give up, right, in exchange for focusing on some of your must-haves. Also, the strategy I love, Bernie loves the blend and extend. I have the have your cake and eat it too, which means why not do both? As you're approaching your landlord, why not even before you do approach them, why not just see? Why not send a proposal, letter of intent, right? Put that fishing rod out to that landlord down the street and just see what they're willing to do. Are they willing to build it out for you? Are they willing to give significant amount of tenant improvement allowance? One of the deals we did recently in Boston, the landlord was offering almost $300,000 of build out coverage just to attract that dental tenant. So, again, what I mean by have your cake and eat it too is negotiate your lease, right? Make sure you're getting a good deal, but let's keep your landlord honest and let's negotiate with a potential one. So at least you know what's the best deal, right? Bird in the hand with the existing location. And then also, if you were to think about relocating, what would that actually look like? What would the best possible price be from that landlord who would love to bring in an established dentist with high quality foot traffic, right? With an existing revenue, with proven elements of profitability, right? So also demolition. Lot of conversations with doctors that said, look, I know this building is going to get demolished. I know that if I'm going to sell in a few years, 5 or 10 years from now, they're not going to want this older looking feeling office. If you've had those thoughts, or if there's things like a demolition clause or relocation right in your lease, that is a big red flag as it pertains to the valuation. So if you feel that the long-term in this location has a finite date, in some cases, it might be the right time to rip that Band-Aid off and to really at least go through the event to say, is now the right time to relocate, or should I wait another 5 or 10 years? The only challenge is 5 or 10 years. If you're 40 now, suddenly you're 50, you're now 60, you're really going to want to go through that relocation or potentially sell your practice for just charts versus potentially having a major asset to sell that's built out, that's new, that's aligned with, with all the COVID processes and the interior design and that nice new look and feel that a lot of associates or DSOs are looking to acquire. As we wrap up, a couple of components, buying versus leasing. Again, if you're contemplating looking to potentially buy and relocate to a property because, oh my God, Eric, you're right, I'm spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on leasing. That is true. However, if you're looking to buy now, look around. It is a great time, in my opinion, to be a tenant. It is a very difficult time in many landlords, as Bernie touched on, right, to be a landlord with vacancies up, right, with banks barking down the doors, looking to find out, right, where that rental income's coming from, making those mortgage payments. Cash is king right now. So to tie up $1 million or $500,000 in buying a unit or a property on top of another $500,000 or $1 million to build out a new practice, you're taking a massive amount of debt load in a unique period of time. So, and you lose a lot of that flexibility. If that location, if the demographics change, if you're not happy with that location, you're pot committed on both sides. And if there's, heaven forbid, asbestos or any of those other issues, There's no one else to call. You are now the landlord. So regardless of leasing versus buying, the lease is still critical. And that's important. If you own your own space or thinking about owning your own space, you still want to have a good lease, obviously from a tax perspective, making sure it's based on accurate and current fair market rents. Also helpful to determine who's responsible for what. Also very good for delineating the expenses. If you do own and you're using the same credit card to replace the plumbing and fix the roof as you are to buy a whole bunch of merchandise for Henry Schein, then again, heaven forbid, if you were to pass away or you wanted to retain ownership of the property as a passive form of income and sell your practice, then it becomes very difficult to evaluate because now suddenly all the financials are jumbled into one. But in either case, the lease helps to do that, helps to improve the value of the practice and or value of the building by making sure that there's a clear history. And what a great opportunity for a buyer to say, look, this is the lease I've had for myself for the past 7 years. I'm now just going to transfer it on to you, Mr. Buyer, right? And I'm going to be your landlord. Right? Always look at it through the other person's shoes, whether it be through the landlord or the potential buyer for your practice. All right. So how do we structure the lease post-COVID? So these are some good questions. I know we've had another one here. We'll just take a quick question here. So I'm a solo practitioner, small practice in a large metro city. And the building I'm leasing has lost several tenants due to the pandemic. I have 2.5 years left on my lease with 2 5-year options. Is now the right time to negotiate? Even the future is so uncertain. So to that doctor, to the solo practitioner, that's a great question. So in essence, you're into your lease. You've got 2.5 years before your renewal. You've got 2 options left. What do you do? Well, first of all, the uncertainty, that works to your benefit. There are ways of negotiating that renewal in a non-binding way that could be for 6 months, a year and a half, maybe even 2 years in a non-binding way. So yes, by starting the process early, as we're starting to see indications that obviously the inoculations are going well and cities are reopening, and yes, there's variants. So you're right. There's no golden view here, right? Crystal ball. But I would say that yes, first of all, depending on your options, you may be, which we're going to get to in a second, you may be saying by exercising your option, that means you agree to everything within this lease with the exception of rent. The strategy should be to renegotiate a new lease, an improved lease, long before your option to renew deadline. So for those of you that are following along, the 2 things to add into your phone today are, into your calendar. Number 1 is when does your lease expire? Number 2 is when is your option to renew deadline date? And you want to have all the renegotiations done before that option to renew deadline. That could be 6 or 12 months out. So that's a great question there. We'll go to some of the other ones shortly. Back to the screen at hand here. So there can be some $100,000 risks hiding in your lease. We'll have lots more time for questions at the end. We touched on a couple. You want to be cautious about the assignment. If you are contemplating either renewing or relocating, if you are going to just, in either case, what's your exit strategy? How long are you going to practice for? How long do you want to be chairside for? And then how long do you want to own it for? And if so, whom are you going to sell it to? You don't have to decide today, but you do want to make sure that the lease is structured in a way that might prevent you from having a change of control, or it might give the landlord way too much control to determine if or whom you're able to sell to. Or maybe the landlord even conditions the sale of your practice. And in some cases, we've seen examples where the landlord says, the only way I'm going to approve the new doctor and your sale, therefore, and by assigning the lease, is wanting a 30% increase in rent. Well, can you imagine what would that do to your buyer, that if the 11th hour, suddenly the landlord wants a massive increase in rent, it's going to kill the deal. And if you talk to some of the practice brokers on the PPT team at Henry Schein, right, they'll tell you that one of the main reasons why the deal dies at the 11th hour is because of the lease. So the earlier you get that structured, typically 5 or 10 years prior to transition, Get it fixed then. Far easier to get that fixed than it is to wait 2 months before you're about to sell and say, oh yeah, shoot, what's going on with the lease? Demolition, relocation, death, and disability. So doctors, a massive asterisk for those of you taking notes is to prioritize the death and disability right within your lease. If COVID has taught us anything, it's that the unexpected should be expected. And how do we prepare for that? And we've heard some devastating examples of doctors who had passed away with a new practice or a recent build out. And unfortunately, their estate got hammered with not only the monthly payments, but the remaining term on the lease. So one of the main strategies to help protect yourself and your estate and your family is something called the death and disability clause. We helped to get a reputation 26 years ago with this type of language, which is dental specific, that states, heaven forbid, you're unable to practice wet finger dentistry, or you were to pass away, heaven forbid, right? What it does is it gives your estate the ability to either not be in default and renew your lease in preparation for sale, or it allows them to have a termination rate. Within a 3-6 month period, they can give notice and they can then walk away from the lease. The death and disability clause, doctor, should be one of the main strategies, but it's all about how it's specifically worded. The surrender language, that's interesting. A lot of doctors have reached out to say, Eric, you know what? I'm done. I can't stand it anymore. What are my options? And I just want to walk away and just give back the keys. Be cautious. A lot of you in the surrender provision within your lease may be responsible for returning it to pre-dental condition or removing all of the leasehold improvements. That can include a number of factors. Number one, that can include the medical grade plumbing and electrical. That can include the walls. That can include the reception area. That can include it all. Be cautious. All right. Lots of others. Again, if you're not sure, email us and happy to run through specifically for your lease. In the essence of time, I'll just cover this at a high level. But for those of you thinking renewing versus relocating, the option to renew clause really does dictate what that looks like. Options can be great for you as a tenant, but they can also be very restrictive. So in essence, you're agreeing to everything within the lease to remain the same with the exception of rent. So take a quick minute now, give a quick perusal for those of you that are able to see it, and try to see what some of the issues are. We'll take a quick couple of seconds here. So here are some of the main red flags. Hopefully the first thing you noticed as you're following along in your lease as well, this is usually an appendix or hidden away somewhere in the back 3/4 of the back 3 acreage of the lease. So it says here, provided that Dr. Joe Black shall remain as the tenant. And if the tenant duly and has regularly paid its rent. So number one, hopefully you noticed it's personal, which means that if you're going to renew your lease and hunker down and stay, are your options transferable? You might think, just like the former doctor that posted the question, well, hey, I've got 2 more 5-year terms. That's good. Right? That should be more than enough to the buyer to have. However, if it's personal to you, that's only good for you. You might only have 1 year left on your lease, and those 2 5-year options are not applicable and non-transferable to your buyer. So that then suddenly creates a problem where now you go to sell and you've only got whatever the remaining balance of that term is. Those options should be redrafted to be transferable. In addition to that, are you in default? We touched on a number of different examples. There was a terrible situation with the doctor built in a beautiful end cap, right? So the end of the strip mall, lots of natural light. And it was something as silly as the hours of operations posted on her door was the reason that the landlord and their team scrounged to try to find some loophole to push that doctor out. Why? Because a coffee shop wanted to move in and wanted her out. And that doctor had to relocate at the end of her first 10-year term, all because of this type of language. Another major red flag midway through, it states here, any such renewal shall be on the landlord's then current standard form lease. Again, you've got a 70-page lease. Here's one sentence. But imagine it gives the landlord the ability to hit the reset button. Whatever you renegotiated, unfortunately, good news for the landlord. Here's a whole new lease, Dr. Smith. And they can propose whatever they'd want. And if they've delayed or deferred or waited this long for you to actually then get engaged and renew your lease, what options do you have? You've got 2 or 3 months left before it expires, right? Oh, shoot, I guess I'm forced. I better just sign it again, right? Don't find yourself in that predicament. The more time you have, the more leverage, the more options you have at that time, pardon the pun. Also, another big one, in no event shall it be less than the rent paid in the last year of the original term. You're now on the world's most boring roller coaster, right? It goes up every single year, year over year over year, right? Bernie loves that one, right? World's most boring roller coaster. You renew the lease. Oh, well, it's COVID. Well, if you're going to exercise the option, it's going to be higher, right? Be cautious about that. Great for the landlord. That shows that you're just a nice little annuity revenue stream for them, but it decreases your ability. What's the solution? Try to negotiate something new, right? And get that done prior to your option to renew deadline. That gives you, again, the benefit of not being beholden to everything that's in the lease today. Okay. In the essence of time, as we wrap up here, here's an example where a client reached out to us in desperation. This was a scenario where, small, little, fairly rural area. What he thought was his friend was the landlord next door. As a result, he missed his option to renew deadline. And then the landlord then came back and sent him this love note, which basically stated that you had an option to renew, but you missed the option to renew deadline, right? You had to give me 6 months prior notice, which you did not do. Please be advised, my broker will be placing a for lease sign in a conspicuous but non-intrusive place on the premises next week. And oh, by the way, if you're interested in staying, have your people call my people. Right? Doctor hired us immediately, and we had to then structure a new deal. But just because it was a few days behind that option to renew deadline date, all of those remaining options became null and void. So please make sure you're tracking that. What's the solution again, doctor? The tactical tips and tricks. This is what they teach landlords, which is, right, the best time for you as the tenant to start renegotiating is 24 months out. If not, right, what does the landlord do? Oh, we're busy. Oh my God, it's COVID. We're not going to even contemplate renegotiating. Then 12 months become 8 months, become 3 months. Suddenly your option to renew is missed. You're now sitting there with full control to the landlord. Avoid that. Starting the process early, helping to protect yourself early, and typically be proactive. One of the strategies we've found is to draft a proper proposal to the landlord outlining both financial and business clauses that we want to see within the lease and hitting them where it hurts in the wallet. And I can assure you, some of those asset managers in those markets that Bernie mentioned that are looking at a lot of vacancies and looking at how to salvage after a very difficult year, to have a dentist with a 5 or a 10-year term. I mean, imagine being that landlord getting the phone call versus the florist or the nail salon or otherwise that's still shut down or otherwise, and suddenly, not being able to pay rent versus the dentist who's actually now looking at the glass half full. So as we wrap up and go to questions, this is what we found over 26 years to really help to prepare yourself. Number one, get all the information. If you do not have a signed and countersigned document from the landlord for your current lease today, it's not worth the paper it's written on, number one. Number two is figure out your long-term goals. Where are you at? What do you want to do? Number three is have someone professionally review your lease. At least know what's in there so you have the facts. Number four, get the data, right? To properly do a rental rate analysis, you want to have your lease reviewed, look at all the different aspects of those 7 main financial variables. And number five is think of that carefully choreographed game of chess. Think about what your end game is first. What have we not done yet? We've gone all the way 1 through 5. We have not yet picked up the phone and called the landlord. Unfortunately, what do most doctors do? Oh gosh, I just saw a webinar. I got to renegotiate my lease early. I'm going to pick up the phone and just immediately call the landlord. Hey, what do you want to charge me now? All right, please don't fall into that trap. I had a bunch of clients say that really resounded with them on the last webinar. then properly negotiate the financials, then properly negotiate the business clauses, and then make sure that you get a final signed and countersigned version of that lease. Some final things for those of you that are still saying, hey, should I stay? Should I go? Here's some great examples. Here was a doctor that wrote us a beautiful 5-star Google review out of Boston, Massachusetts. She wanted to renew, right? She said, you know what, just for fun, what do you think of this location? What are they willing to do? We were able to secure her $283,950 towards the construction of her new dental office. It was enough that she said, thank God, I wanted to get away. Here's what I've done, and a great success story. Here's another one I referenced earlier, right? Tried to sell her practice 3 separate times, was forced to. And as a result, we got the landlord to cover 100% of her build-out costs, right? That was a true winning story. Of course, it doesn't happen all the time, but imagine for coming from such a devastating situation, having tried to sell, get 3 buyers right on the line, and every time the landlord said, no, I will not assign the lease, to then relocate her purely in preparation for sale. All right, I see a whole slew of questions, so would encourage you all to feel free to continue to post. We'll keep the lines open to cover any open conversations based on your specific situations, but in appreciation of everyone's time, if you've been concerned about some of these aspects. Again, I'm not trying to be alarmist here. I'm purely sharing you the candid concerns and feedback of what we've seen over the past 12 months and looking at things from a glass half full perspective to say now, look, you've been through it. You're not alone. Let's start focusing on how to improve your situation, how to improve your profitability. Right? And you've renegotiated everything to try to cut costs. Why not also renegotiate your second biggest hit to overhead, your tenancy expense? So again, in appreciation of everyone's time, we will do a full complimentary dates and risk analysis. That will be complimentary. Those fees will be waived for all of you joining our webinar this evening. We appreciate certainly your time. We'll spend a number of hours doing the due diligence to help ensure that you can help prepare across the board and to ensure that we talk. And I always keep my personal line open. You'll see here in a second, my phone number, right? For those of you with some urgent situations, you're not alone. We're here to assist. And even if you don't have a lease today, we're happy to schedule that complimentary consult. Henry Schein has a huge focus, vested interest on your profitability and success. They have a full practice services division, which we are a part of, right through the Henry Schein website to be able to have a lot of great information and support to help ensure that your business is protected. Focus on dentistry, allow us focus on getting the best possible results and taking the stress off your shoulders. On that note, truly appreciate your time. And let's jump into some questions. I know we've got some great ones here. So perfect. So as we look through, for those of you, again, looking to reach out or otherwise, I'll pull up the email address, but let's spend some time on Q&A. So let's see here. You also deal with the sale of the building. So in short, no, but we work with top brokers from coast to coast that will happy to make some introductions. So Dr. Nicholas, happy to make some introductions there for you. But certainly, again, the question is, if you are going to be purchasing a building, the next question is, we should have a conversation about how you want to pay yourself. You might think it's easy. Your accountant might say, hey, I'll just send you something off online. But again, very important and structured to be dental specific. Another question here, Doctor, is it possible to buy a unit of a larger building, strip mall kind of building, or are there laws about buying the entire property? So in short, it depends. Right? Depends on the landlord, depends on the specific situation. I think what you're saying here is look, I'd love to own my own unit because there's maybe some HOA fees, maybe there's some other components. I don't want to buy the whole thing. I don't want to have another tenant. I don't want to be a full-time landlord, but is there the option to buy? In short, yes, there's lots of doctors, lots of buildings out there that offer units for sale. There's pros and cons with that, as you can imagine. But yes, that can be a possibility. Another question here, building and land is sold. I'm renting for a year or so. How would you value charts? So That would probably be a better question for some of Henry Schein's professional practice transitions team, the PPT team, because you're sort of now trying to figure out where is the value. It sounds like the rug's been pulled out from under you, where if the building and the land is sold and there's a new landlord, you're renting for a year. My question would be is, if you're still working and you've got a high level of production, don't just sell it for charts. Right? Think about all the associates out there that would love to have a fully built out practice, turnkey, ready to go. They're going to save themselves a couple of $100,000. And as a starting practice, especially for those that might not be able to get the full financing, this is a great turnkey approach. So don't just, hey, I'm just going to sell my charts and walk. Really take some time to think about it from the buyer's perspective. And heck, even if you sold the location, the leasehold improvements for $1 or $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000, there's value there, let alone some of the charts. So before you make any hasty decisions on that, take your time. Another great question. My lease expires in 2022. What are your fees to negotiate the lease? So great question, Doctor. I would certainly suggest at the end to request a complimentary lease review. In short, there's a few different options depending, is it an assignment? Is it the scope of work? If there can be elements of based on time, or it could be based on things on a flat rate basis. So great question, Doctor. I'd encourage you to send a copy of the lease. No different from a doctor, asking over the phone, hey, my tooth hurts. How much is that going to cost? We really want to not do you a disservice. Happy to schedule a complimentary lease review. There's no cost or commitment, of course, for doing that lease review. Some other questions here. We've got some accountants on the line. CPA, public practice. There's a growing number of veterinarians and dentists as clients. We should touch base. Yes, happy to do so. We do work with some of the top firms in the country, and definitely happy to help support you or any of your clients. It's just good practice. You're, as the financial planner, as a CPA or financial advisor, of course, you're trying to create some great strategies how to effectively prepare for a smooth transition. If, due to the landlord and the lease, all the work that you're done to avoid tax and to be, is it an asset sale, is it a share sale, all the hard work you've done with corporations as their CPA, imagine something as silly as the lease that suddenly, causes a 5, 10, 15, 20% reduction in the eventual sale proceeds. That could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So all of that hard work, just because the lease wasn't set up properly, suddenly unwinds all that good work you've done. So yes, for those of you from different professional designations, happy to schedule a call and circle through. You can email your info through to info@. That'll hit my inbox, and happy to circle through. Dr. Gary, we want to sell the practice, but not the building. How do you transition from owner to landlord? Bernie, that might be a great one for you. So a doctor who owns both the building and the practice, they now want to keep that passive form of income. And how do we transition effectively to become from being an owner-occupier, landlord, right? One pocket, the other hat is a dentist, now I'm a full-time landlord. Bernie, you want to share some of your
perspective? So thanks, Eric. This is the way to look at this really is to look at it as two different entities. And that one is, they're two separate businesses, and to have the delineation between the dentistry practice and the landlord. And that's something that we do on an ongoing basis. We've done it throughout North America. We're just talking to a doctor in Omaha who's doing exactly that. And she's going out and buying more buildings. And so to have that, first of all, there's a whole bunch of reasons. There's tax reasons, which your CPA can help you with. There's liability issues. There's continuity. If you want to sell the practice, to put a lease in place that someone like Eric mentioned before, that's not just buying the files, but they're buying rent certainty, that they have an ongoing lease that protects them, that they're always going to be in the same place and they can build their practice from there. Part of the value of your business is the lease. So put something in place. We can help you with that language that helps you sell the business with the assignment, sell the practice, but also keep that passive revenue as a landlord. yeah, it's a great way to go.
Perfect. We'll take a quick pause. Lots of questions. I see the majority of you are all still on. If we can pull up the poll, Adam, that'll give you the option to request the complimentary lease review or rental rate analysis. So number one, a couple of questions. Again, do you have a current lease today? Number two is, when does that lease expire? Number three is your situation urgent? So again, for those of you that are in a month-to-month lease, or the lease is coming due in the next few months or within the next year, definitely mark as urgent. We'll prioritize that. We typically get a few hundred of requests through these. So we want to prioritize those over the next few days or through the weekend. Again, you're not alone. We're here to assist. Again, quick question number 4, yes, for a complimentary review and lease analysis. And then we will receive those. For those of you with any questions or concerns, you again can email us now at info@searsconsultinggroup.com. In addition to that, also right on the landing page, if you're looking for the links, more detail, videos, a little bit more background, you can go to henryscheindental.com/Cirrus, spelled CIRRUS. And there's a lot of good information. There's soon to be a dental lease risk assessment questionnaire. Dr. Gary, thank you so much. We appreciate your kind words. Glad you found it very helpful.
Eric, if I can just jump in very quickly.
Please.
Been a lot of information today, a lot to take in. The one thing I'd like to leave you with before people start jumping off is, in my 20 plus years in the business, honestly, there's never been a better time for you to open negotiations with your current or future landlord. All the other stuff aside, we can take care of. The one thing that you have to take care of is initiating that with us. There's never been a better time. I really encourage you to take advantage of the complimentary lease review. And from there, we can start talking about the opportunity to renegotiate. Don't look 2 years from now and start thinking about it then, because that ship will have sailed, and it will. It's the best time I've seen in 20 plus years in the business, including the crash in 08.
Great. Thanks, Bernie. Another question from Dr. Emily from earlier. What can be done if I know the other tenants in my building are paying lower CAM fees, or have called management or administration fees are paying less per square foot? Boy, does that ever rub you the wrong way. It's unfortunate because, look, obviously they probably had some professional help. They negotiated a better deal. And therefore, I think the main perspective there and takeaway is, Emily, as you come up to your next renewal, once bitten, twice shy, now's the time to make those improvements. Now, you don't want to say that you've found out or that you're aware of what the other tenants are doing, but definitely, part of what we would do is look at the deals we've done in the area, what the landlord's been open to in the past. If we've negotiated with that landlord before, probably. But in that case, definitely we would just emphasize the focus on the negotiations to help ensure that you're getting a fair deal as well. You shouldn't have to pay more than your fair share just because you just signed it. Right? So I would definitely encourage you that this time around, don't fall into that same trap, and focus on getting an even better deal than your neighbor. Be one that you want to, dig up your lease and be proud to say, right? Now, don't share your lease. There's confidentiality in it with, sharing it with other tenants, but definitely make sure that you're understanding what's in it, get it professionally reviewed, and beyond. We'll keep those questions open. Glad to see a lot are still with us now. Any additional questions for doctors? Let me just check to see. Lots of the boards been flying here. Yes, there will be a recording, but again, it is customized to the situation. So if you are curious about your own individual rental rates or otherwise, feel free to give that a quick update and reach out, and we're happy to assist and connect with that as well, with your own specific situations. And fantastic. Okay, great. Michelle, thank you for reaching out. We'll certainly follow up with you for the specific lease review. I'm glad you posted it through there. Depending on your situation, you can also email us a copy of the digital copy of the lease. And certainly if there are some concerns, Emily, yes, thank you. If it's capped, that's a great one. Good for your other tenants that were able to initiate a capped annual increase, what that means now is you're just now paying more than your fair share. So, right, obviously now the landlord's been the other tenants have been eating your lunch. Pardon the graphic there, but they're, if they're capped at 2% per year and they've had to redo the parking lot and the roof and pay for vacancies and other expenses, well, now suddenly guess who's having to pay for it? So what I would suggest, Emily, is that if in the event when your lease is coming up for renewal, do you know when? Is that within the next year, 2 years, 3 years? If it is within the next, call it 2 to 3, I would certainly suggest starting it now. Good. So if that's January of next year, then certainly you're right within that sweet spot. Candidly, you're probably about a year behind. We should definitely connect sooner than later, because you want to focus on not only CAM, but base rent, annual increases, free rent. Those type of things are key. A good one. It feels like a live chat here. So Emily said that she had tried to reach out to the landlord, and what did they do? He delayed, deferred. Oh, you know what? I'm busy. I'm golfing. Right? Have you heard that one before, Bernie? Yeah. So in essence, Emily, don't fall into that trap. Right? The best way of doing it, in our opinion, is to be proactive versus reactive. Of course, the landlord's going to defer, delay. The last thing he wants to do is to deal with you and deal with renegotiating CAM rates. However, let's be proactive. Let's hit him in the wallet. Let's now propose perhaps a 5, maybe even a 10-year term with 2 5-year options. Let's hit him in the wallet. Let's go with market price, maybe a little less. Let's focus on tenant improvement allowance. Let's focus on a couple other things, right? But let's say, look, I'm prepared to sign a new lease. If not, I need to evaluate other options. And if your lease expires January of 2022, that does not give you a lot of time to play that option B card, that potential relocation, right? Potentially you don't want to relocate, but if it's January of 2022, the time to engage the negotiations are now. The best way to do that is to have a proper proposal drafted, letter of intent, etc., to then send to the landlord, get a specific period of time, and trust me, that is now a check. Right? And don't fall into that trap. Start early, be proactive, get some professional representation, and they're going to sit up and take notice. And there's also, there's good strategies that we found out over the years to try to get them to that negotiation table. Perfect. For those of you, Michelle, if you don't have a digital copy of the lease, yes, you can just email your landlord. Hey, please send me a digital copy of my original lease, as well as any addendums, riders, or exhibits. They should have a copy on hand. They should be able to send it back to you very quickly. And perfect. So some good questions there. Fantastic. Okay, great. Any additional questions?
I think you answered them all.
Fantastic. Beautiful. Appreciate it. Yeah, look forward to working with you. Again, we help clients coast to coast to coast to coast. We certainly appreciate Henry Schein for hosting us and being great resources and partners of ours for the past 10 years. Again, we've been able to help and do over 12,000 leases, and we look forward to seeing how we can help and assist yourself.
Thank you, Eric and Bernie, for your time today. Great content as always. If anyone does have additional questions, again, feel free to reach out to Sears Consulting, or you can email us at webinars@henryschein.com, and we will direct to Eric and company. Additionally, if anyone is interested in attending future Henry Schein webinars, visit henryscheindental.com/webinars for our upcoming schedule. As a thank you for attending, everyone will receive the recording of this email sometime in the next week. Thank you all for joining, and we look forward to seeing you back here soon. Have a great night.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Adam.